Lancashire does cotton towns and moorland rather well. Stone terraces climbing hillsides in tight rows, brass bands on recreation grounds, the county that powered the Industrial Revolution and never quite got the credit it deserved. But Lancashire has another register, one that does not appear in the tourist guides, one that locals discuss only in certain company after the visitors have gone home. These are 15 places in Lancashire where something is deeply and persistently wrong. Places where locals know better than to go after dark. We begin with a building that hosts weddings on weekends and something else entirely after hours. Samlesbury Hall sits on the A677 between Preston and Blackburn, a 14th century black and white timber-framed manor house surrounded by lawns where couples pose for photographs. It is Grade 1 listed. It operates as a heritage venue, and its staff have stories they do not include in the brochure. The hall was built around 1325 by the Southworth family. In the late 1500s, a daughter of the house named Dorothy Southworth fell in love with a young man from the Hoghton family. The problem was religion. The Southworths were Catholic, the Hoghtons were Protestant. According to accounts recorded in Whitaker's History of Whalley, first published in 1796, Dorothy's brothers ambushed her lover and his companions on the road and killed them. Dorothy was sent to a convent on the continent. She never returned to Lancashire. Staff at the hall describe a woman in white on the main staircase. Cold spots that drift through the chapel area and settle in corners where no draught exists. Objects moved overnight in locked rooms. Wedding coordinators have described brides mentioning a figure they noticed during their ceremony. Nobody had told them the story beforehand. They saw her anyway. 6 miles north of Preston, near the village of Goosnarch, a moated farmhouse sits at the end of a lane that locals prefer not to walk after sunset. Chingle Hall has been called the most haunted domestic dwelling in Britain. The claim appears in multiple paranormal reference works. What it carries is 600 years of documented unease. The hall was built in 1260 by the de Singleton family. It later became home to the Wall family, prominent Catholic recusants who sheltered priests during the years when practicing Catholicism in England could mean death. The house contains 6 priest holes discovered during renovation work, hidden rooms behind panelling where men waited in silence while search parties moved through the building above them. One of those priests, John Wall, was captured, tried, and executed in 1679. He was beatified in 1888 and canonized in 1970 as one of the 40 martyrs of England and Wales. The building has wept. Moisture appears on brickwork that testing has failed to explain through structural causes. Footsteps sound in rooms above the concealed priest holes. Residents of Goosnarch on local forums describe a reluctance to approach the lane that goes back generations. Their grandparents told them to stay away. They passed the same instruction to their own children without ever being able to say exactly what they were afraid of. Driving north from Bolton along the edge of the West Pennine Moors, you reach Turton Tower, a partly medieval, partly Tudor tower house managed by Blackburn with Darwen Council. Stone walls, mullioned windows, tidy grounds with interpretation boards. Inside, a skull. The timber-bottom skull has been kept at Turton Tower for over a century. Its origin is uncertain, but local accounts link it to a murder victim whose remains were found at a nearby farmstead called Timberbottom. The tradition is specific. Whenever the skull is removed from the building, disturbances follow. Screaming, violent weather, objects thrown. The skull is returned and the disturbances stop. This is not unique to Turton. Lancashire has a documented tradition of screaming skulls kept in houses, recorded by the folklorist James Bowker in Goblin Tales of Lancashire, published in 1883. The Turton skull is the one that wardens still speak about carefully. Visitors react to specific rooms before being told what happened there. Children refuse to enter the chamber where the skull was traditionally kept. The wardens do not dismiss these reactions. They note them and move on. Smithills Hall in Bolton is one of the oldest manor houses in Lancashire, Parts of it date to the 14th century. Stone floors worn smooth by 600 years of footsteps. One of those footsteps will not go away. On the floor of a passageway is a dark stain known as the Bloody Footprint. In 1555, during the reign of Mary Tudor, a Protestant preacher named George Marsh was brought to Smithills Hall for interrogation. According to tradition recorded in Fox's Book of Martyrs, published in 1563, Marsh stamped his foot during questioning and declared that God would leave a mark of his innocence on the stone. The stain appeared. Marsh was taken to Chester and burned at the stake on April the 24th, 1555. The footprint remains. It has survived cleaning. It has survived the replacement of surrounding stonework. It was documented in Baines's History of the County Palatine and Duchy of Lancaster, published in 1836. Nobody has explained it. The hall is now a museum surrounded by public parkland. On Bolton Forum, one contributor noted that their dog consistently refused to pass a specific doorway. They had walked the dog through Smithills Park for 4 years. The refusal never changed. We leave the halls now and enter a valley. Wycoller is a hamlet near Colner, tucked into a fold in the landscape at the edge of the Forest of Bowland. Its population is effectively zero on a permanent basis. The ruins of Wycoller Hall stand open to the sky. The hall is believed to have inspired Ferndean Manor in Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. The last squire, Henry Owen Cunliffe, died in the late 18th century. The estate collapsed. The village emptied as the textile industry pulled residents toward the factory towns below. What remains are stone packhorse bridges, ruined farm buildings, and the hollow shell of the hall itself. A spectral horseman is said to ride to the hall on the anniversary of the squire's death. A woman's screams are reported from within the ruins. Lancashire County Council maintains Wycoller as a country park, established in 1973. After 4 in the afternoon in winter, you are largely alone here. Walking groups on Lancashire forums describe a quality of silence in this valley that is out of proportion to its geography. One contributor wrote that they had walked hundreds of valleys across the Pennines and nowhere else produced the same oppressive stillness. The path back to your car feels longer than the path in. Now the ground shifts beneath us. We have been dealing with spectral ladies and unexplained footprints. What follows is documented in court records, coroners' reports, and testimonies given under oath. The darkness here is not supernatural. It is entirely human. Lancaster Castle dominates the hilltop above the River Lune. You can see it from the M6 as you pass through the city. A working castle, court, and prison for over 900 years. Founded in the 11th century on Roman foundations, Grade 1 listed, a scheduled ancient monument, and the site of more documented suffering than any other building in the county. The hanging corner is a small room where condemned prisoners waited before being taken to the gallows. Over 200 people were executed at Lancaster Castle between 1782 and 1865. The Pendle witches were tried and sentenced here in 1612. The dungeons beneath the well tower, dating to the reign of Henry IV, held prisoners in conditions that inquest records describe in difficult detail. The castle functioned as a prison until 2011 and opened to expanded public tours in 2013. Tour guides describe cold spots in the dungeon that shift position between visits. In the hanging corner, visitors physically step back before being told what the room was used for. They feel it first. Night tours sell out months in advance. Repeat visitors say the castle feels like a different building after dark. The silence in the well tower has a weight to it that daytime noise conceals. Pendle Hill rises to 557 metres above the villages of Barley, Roughly, Newchurch in Pendle, and Sabden. The 1612 witch trials are well documented. Thomas Potts published The Wonderful Discovery of Witches in the county of Lancaster the following year. 10 people were hanged. Most were poor, elderly, and female. But this entry is not about the trials. It is about what the hill does to people now. Locals distinguish between daytime Pendle and Pendle after dark. The mist that gathers in the valleys below the summit is unusually dense. On the UK Hill Walking Forum, contributors describe compass behaviour on Pendle they have not encountered on comparable hills. The area around Newchurch in Pendle, where the Eye of God was painted on the church tower centuries ago to ward off evil, still produces reports of unease that go beyond normal moorland isolation. Lancashire constabulary records note a higher than average number of calls from walkers reporting being followed on paths around the hill during winter months. No person is ever found. In the Ribble Valley, beside the River Calder, stand the ruins of Whalley Abbey. Cistercian monks founded it in 1296. For over 200 years, a community prayed, farmed, and lived within these walls. Then Henry VIII's commissioners arrived. The last abbot, John Paslew, refused to surrender the abbey. He had supported the Pilgrimage of Grace. He was charged with treason and executed at Lancaster on the 10th of March, 1537. The abbey was stripped. Lead was torn from the roof. Glass was smashed from the windows. The monks were scattered. What remains are the nave walls, the chapter house foundations, and the lay brothers' range. The Blackburn Diocese operates a conference centre on the grounds today. Staff have described lights in the ruined nave at night when no one is on the site. The most frequently reported experience is the sound of chanting from the direction of the ruins during early morning hours. Residents of Whalley Village on community forums describe growing up knowing not to play in the abbey ruins after dark. One contributor remembered their grandmother, who lived beside the abbey grounds and kept her curtains drawn on the side facing the ruins every night for over 40 years. She never explained why. The A666 runs from Bolton through Egerton and Edgeworth toward the moors above Ramsbottom. Its road number was assigned by the Ministry of Transport in the 1922 numbering scheme with no supernatural intent. But the road has earned its reputation independently. Lancashire County Council road safety data shows accident rates for the stretch between Egerton and the Turton and Entwistle Reservoir above the county average for comparable moorland roads. Drivers on Lancashire motoring forums describe figures at the roadside who are not present when the car reaches the spot. A specific stretch near Turton Bottoms has produced repeated reports of a dark shape crossing the road at a point where no footpath exists and no pedestrian has reason to be. A Bolton News article from 2016 collected testimonies from regular commuters who described identical experiences without knowledge of each other's accounts. One driver had used the road for his daily commute for 11 years. He stopped driving it in winter after 3 separate incidents he could not explain. He now takes a longer route through Bromley Cross and does not discuss why unless asked directly. Hoghton Tower sits on a hilltop between Preston and Blackburn. It is famous for hosting King James I in 1617. The tourist version involves banqueting halls and the origin of the word sirloin. The other version involves Catholic persecution, a civil war siege in 1643, and restoration work in the 19th century that uncovered human remains where no burial had been recorded. The Green Lady appears in the banqueting hall and on the ramparts. Staff who manage events at the tower describe areas where audio equipment malfunctions consistently and where temperature drops are measurable with standard instruments. Some catering teams have added clauses to their service agreements about working alone in certain wings. A wedding photographer on a Preston community forum described an image captured in the long gallery containing a figure not present during the exposure. The photographer had worked over 200 weddings across Lancashire. Hoghton Tower was the only venue that made them check behind themselves while packing up. We move now into different territory. Not haunted halls or documented apparitions, but places where the land itself holds something it will not release. Towneley Hall in Burnley is the town's art gallery and museum, managed by the council, staffed by municipal employees who have no incentive to invent stories. The Towneley family held the estate for over 500 years as recusant Catholics, with all the suffering that history involved. A former curator, speaking to the Burnley Express, described an experience in the chapel that they initially attributed to feeling unwell. They later learned that other staff had described identical sensations in the same location without any communication between them. Cold arriving suddenly. A pressure in the chest. The sense that the room had become smaller. Museum staff rotas accommodate the preference of certain employees not to work alone in the chapel wing on winter afternoons when the light fails early and the hall falls quiet. On the moorland above Burnley, at a point called Crown Point, roughly 300 metres above the town, stands a sculpture with no ghost, no history of death, and no dark past. The singing ringing tree was installed in 2006, designed by the architects Tonkin Liu, and won a Royal Institute of British Architects National Award in 2007. It is 3 metres tall, made of stacked galvanised steel pipes, and when the wind passes through it, produces a sound. That sound is the point. On a clear afternoon, it is remarkable. A landmark. Something to photograph and share. At dusk, in low cloud, when the wind rises and the steel begins to hum, and you cannot see beyond 20 metres, the experience changes entirely. Visitors on walking forums describe the twilight encounter in consistent terms. One reviewer wrote that they visited alone at dusk and left before the light fully failed because the sound made them feel observed. There is no ghost here. There is only wind and metal and open moor. And on the right evening, that is more than enough. Above Rivington, between Chorley and Bolton, Lord Leverhulme built terraced gardens of extraordinary ambition between 1900 and 1925. Stone staircases climbing the hillside, archways, ornamental lakes, loggias. A bungalow at the summit that the suffragette Edith Rigby burned on the 8th of July, 1913. The bungalow was rebuilt and burned again. Leverhulme died, and the gardens were left to the elements. What remains covers approximately 45 acres. Trees grow through the stonework, pools have silted, paths lead to structures that no longer have roofs or purpose. Walking the upper terraces alone in autumn, you move through rooms open to sky, past doorways framing cloud, up staircases ending in nothing. Bolton and Chorley walking groups describe the upper terraces as disorienting despite being compact in area. Sound behaves oddly among the ruined structures. Footsteps carry further than they should. Voices seem to arrive from directions that make no spatial sense. The gardens are not haunted. They are abandoned on a scale the mind finds difficult to absorb. You are walking through someone else's ambition, overgrown and reclaimed, and the moor above watches you do it. Near Ribchester in the Ribble Valley, in a field you could drive past without noticing, stands Stydd Chapel. A single room with a stone font and walls that may date to the 12th century, built by the Knights Hospitaller, on a site that may have been used for worship since the Anglo-Saxon period. Ribchester itself sits on the Roman fort Bremetenicum, occupied from the 1st century through the 4th. The Ribchester hoard was discovered in 1840. The chapel represents a continuity of sacred use on one specific piece of ground, stretching back potentially 2,000 years. It is not haunted. No ghost has been reported. But visitors describe entering the chapel as a physical experience. A weight, a pressure, a sense that the air inside is older than the stone around it. English heritage visitor book entries shared on local heritage forums record the sensation repeatedly. One entry states simply that something is present inside those walls that predates the building entirely. We end where Lancashire is deepest, not in a building or a ruin, but on the open moor between Barley and the Nick of Pendle, walked at night. This is not about ghosts. It is about what happens when you walk this ground alone in darkness. The surface is uneven peat. Tussock grass catches your boots. Cloud cover removes the stars and with them any sense of direction. The wind carries rain that is never quite heavy enough to stop for, but never light enough to ignore. There is no tree cover. There is no shelter. There is no sound beyond wind and the movement of water finding its way downhill through channels you cannot see. Lancashire moorland at night is an absence of light, of reference points, of everything that tells your brain where it is and how far it has come. Experienced walkers describe a specific phenomenon that has nothing supernatural about it, and yet feels as though it should. The conviction that the moor extends without limit in every direction. That you could walk for hours and arrive nowhere. That the landscape has taken you in and is not inclined to return you. Mountain rescue call-outs for the Pendle area average between 15 and 25 per year. A significant proportion occur after dark. This is the real reason locals do not go out on these moors at night. Not because of the witches hanged 4 centuries ago. Not because of screaming skulls or spectral horsemen. Because the land itself, in darkness, and in silence, and in weather, is sufficient. A contributor on the UK Hill Walking Forum, writing about a November night crossing, said they had walked in the Highlands, the Lake District, and Snowdonia after dark. Lancashire was the only place where the darkness felt personal. 15 places. Some are wrong in ways that attract overnight vigils and ghost hunting groups. Documented hauntings, footprints that will not wash away, skulls that resist being moved. Others are wrong in ways that have nothing to do with the supernatural and everything to do with stone and silence and the accumulated weight of what this ground has witnessed over a very long time. Lancashire holds all of it. The mill towns and the moorland, the wedding venues and the execution chambers, the civic sculpture and the screaming woods. The land remembers what we would rather forget. And after dark, it is not always willing to stay quiet about it.